From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to the National Book Festival. I'm Rachel Hardigan Shea, editor of the Washington Post Book World. So glad that you all are here. First, some business, and my apologies if you've heard this 5-6 times already today. But the Library of Congress is filming this for its archives, so be aware that if you ask questions, they will be recorded. And you may have noticed the cameras. C-SPAN is here, so they will also be recording you, so keep that in mind. So I am very proud that the Washington Post is a sponsor of the National Book Festival and has been for all of its 9 years. But I am especially pleased to introduce the next two authors. Sue Monk Kidd had already published 2 works of nonfiction when she tried her hand at fiction and produced The Secret Life of Bees, which sold more than 6 million copies and has been published in 35 countries. Not bad for a first try. Her second novel, The Mermaid's Share, also did incredibly well. But now she has returned to nonfiction with the spiritual memoir, Travels with Pomegranates, which she co-wrote with her daughter, Ann Kidd Taylor, after they traveled together to sacred sites in Greece and France. Please join me in welcoming Sue Monk Kidd and Ann Kidd Taylor.
Thank you. We are so happy to be here and talk to you about our new memoir, what they call a co-memoir, with my daughter, Ann Kidd Taylor. When people discovered that we were writing a book together, we got an interesting array of comments, but about 9 times out of 10, people would say, "Are you two still speaking?" It became a theme, actually. It was so often that we thought it was kind of interesting and then sort of revealing, in fact. The truth is that Ann and I never had one of those pyrotechnic relationships that you read about so famously in mother-daughter relationships. And in fact, when we were traveling together in this book that we write about, we felt like this relationship we had deepened a great deal. In fact, it was transformed completely. We didn't have a pyrotechnic relationship, but we did have the classic mother-daughter struggle. And by that I mean that we had that enduring old struggle of the mother trying to let the daughter go while seeing her as an appendage of her own self, and the daughter trying to please the mother and pattern herself after her mother, but at the same time doing everything she can to separate herself from her mother and forge her own identity. So that's kind of the classic struggle, I think, and we indulged in that greatly. You could argue, I think, that the mother-daughter relationship is one of, if not the most, emotionally intense and enduring and conflicted and ambivalent and closest and relationship on earth. Some years ago, I read a few lines of poetry by the poet Adrienne Rich, which is about the mother-daughter experience and that connection. And I thought it was so beautiful and so provocative. I just want to read it to you. She wrote, "Probably there is nothing in human nature more resonant with charges than the flow of energy between 2 biologically alike bodies, one of which has lain in amniotic bliss inside the other, one of which has labored to give birth to the other. The materials are here for the deepest mutuality and the deepest estrangement." And then there's what Lillian Carter said, President Carter's mother. She said, "Sometimes when I look at my children, I say to myself, Lillian, you should have stayed a virgin." So as you see, mother-daughter relationships are loaded They're never finished somehow, and they're never irrelevant, and they're never casual.
Writing this book together was my idea, but I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. Initially, I set out to write this book by myself, but after working on it for years, I realized I was only telling half of the story. There just seemed like another story, my mom's story, and that it needed to be in there too. So not long after that, around my 27th birthday, I was talking to my mom and I heard myself say, "Well, why don't you write the book with me?" And that was the spring of 2003, and my mom was gearing up to write The Mermaid Chair, so my timing was awful. But to my surprise, she said, "I'd love to." And then she paused and, sounding very serious, added, "But Anne, I want you to be really, really sure." And I was, right up until she said that to me. A few years ago, my mom had some quotations stenciled on the stairway that lead up to her study on the second floor. I still read them from time to time when I go over there. The one at the top is by French novelist Émile Zola and says, "If you ask me what I came to do in this world, I, as an artist, will answer you, I am here to live out loud." It occurred to me that writing the book with my mother could mean living a lot louder than I ever thought. It can be fairly terrifying, making yourself audible in the world and putting your voice out there. And I did suddenly feel like I was jumping off the deep end. But I'd heard my mother say that she became a novelist by diving in over her head. She was always saying things like, if you're going to err on the side of audacity. So I thought, okay, well, let's write this book. Recently, however, I've discovered the only thing more audacious than writing a book with my mother is going on a book tour and living out loud in person.
Well, what Anne did not know was that it felt like jumping off the deep end for me too. I had never written a book with anyone beside myself, so this was all new territory. And as I told Anne, I'm probably going around saying things like err on the side of audacity because that's exactly what I needed to hear all along. I think that writers tend to quote things they need to hear themselves. So it took us 3 years to write this book, which was 2 more years than it was supposed to take. Anne actually figured it up that we traveled for 40 days, and it took us 1,095 to write about the traveling. That the book tells the story in alternating chapters. So Anne and I are intersecting our stories back and forth, covering 3 trips that we took together over the course of 3 years to Greece and Turkey, and then to France, and then back to Greece. This is a mother-daughter memoir. But if you wanted to, you could also read this as a travel story. The traveling was extraordinarily profound for both of us. This was a very transitional time in our lives where things were transforming very fast during those 3 years. And Anne and I were visiting places that were really evoking a lot of these changes, so they were catalytic in themselves. I think you could say that Anne and I were on a creative quest, both of us, on a spiritual quest. And these are certainly motifs in the book, writing and creativity and spirituality. The book covers that 3-year period when I was trying to decide to become a novelist. And carrying around this seed of an idea for The Secret Life of Bees, and discovering the icon of the Black Madonna, which was very important because it turned up in The Secret Life of Bees as a rather significant, almost like a character. When the book opens, it is the summer of 1998. I was turning 50 years old. And Anne was newly graduated from college. And the two of us go off to Greece together, ostensibly to mark these two milestones in our lives. However, this classic mother-daughter struggle that I tried to describe earlier was beginning to be stirred up by these very same milestones that we were going over there to celebrate. Anne had been off at college, and frankly, a lot of silence and distance had set in our relationship. We were definitely at a crossroads, there was no doubt about it. And it was during this very first trip that it became apparent to me how much I was longing to reconnect with a daughter I barely knew.
We had not been in Greece very long at all before we bumped into the Demeter and Persephone myth. It's about a mother who is starting to age a little and her daughter, Persephone, who's on the cusp of young womanhood. When the daughter goes missing, her mother mounts a passionate search to find her, and in the end, there is a reunion. It is essentially a story of loss, search, and return. And I think we were both surprised to realize that it was our story also. We would like to read two brief passages that highlight the mother-daughter relationship and the old motif of loss, search, return that runs through it. But the readings also touch on a second major motif in the book, which is about crossing the thresholds of womanhood, but at two ends of life. I was trying to figure out the beginnings of being a woman, and my mom was trying to figure out the beginnings of the ending of it. She describes her transit into older womanhood, which had a sort of turbulence. And let's just say my passage into young womanhood was not smooth sailing. I think after college, a lot of young women are grappling with what to do with their lives. They're trying to understand who they are inside, what they believe, looking for independence, and trying to figure out relationships, and all around dealing with what it means to take on life. The summer after I graduated, I was pretty confused and lost. I actually had no idea what to do with my life. I'd suffered a bitter disappointment that had left me feeling like a failure, and for the first time in my life, I was depressed. The first passage takes place during our very first trip together aboard a ship docked off the coast of Turkey. Up until this point, I've been withholding my feelings from my mother. As I wrote in the book, every day was an acting class. I could not seem to tell her what I was going through, and I felt a kind of partition between us, an invisible room divider that marked the space. But this conversation changed all that. It became a turning point. So picture Mom and me sitting on a deck of the ship at a table beneath a blue umbrella, and it's all very congenial and nice, but well partitioned. When out of nowhere, I unintentionally hint at the state I'm in, and I'm going to pick up right there. Mom adjusts her chair so her eyes are out of the sun, then takes off her sunglasses. She looks at me, seriously looks at me. Her eyes are locked on mine, the expression of someone who knows she has happened upon a moment of impending truth and is not about to retreat from it. "What do you mean, Anne?" she says. I press my fingers against the corners of my eyes and decide I will not cry. I stare at my napkin, blue like the umbrella. As soon as I look up, Mom will finally know how sad I am, and I won't be able to spare her anymore. I force myself to meet her brown eyes. She gives me a small, sad smile. For 1 or 2 seconds, I can tell she sees me in a way I cannot see myself. My eyes fill and her face goes blurry. I fight for composure. If I start to cry, I'm afraid I won't finish till the ship docks again in Athens. She reaches for my hand. "It's okay, just tell me," Mom says. Suddenly, the words are in my mouth, and I'm saying them. I'm just depressed. Her fingers tighten on mine. "I knew something was going on," she says. "I'm sorry. I should have asked you about it. When did all this start?" "When the letter came," I tell her. She wrinkles up her forehead. The letter, the grad school letter, the one confirming my inadequacies. I hear the smart-ass tone in my voice, but for some reason it helps to keep me from falling apart. But that was last March, she says, and her eyes widen. For the next hour, it all pours out, the whole miserable thing. What it was like the day I got the letter, how I hid it in my sock drawer, the way things went from bad to worse, the depression taking over. I tell my mother how afraid I am inside, how lost, how rejected I feel, how the letter had unearthed my own self-doubt and feelings of unworthiness, then the shame that I was not good enough. I cannot hold back anymore. I drop my head on the table and cry. I feel Mom's hand on the back of my head, and I cry harder. It is whole minutes before I can stop. I use the napkin to wipe my nose. The wait staff is having a whispered conversation that I can only imagine. Crazy girl on deck, call the ship's doctor. Mom scoots forward in her chair. Now she knows. Anne, listen to me. I understand how the rejection letter snowballed into a rejection of yourself and how depressed you became. But all those things you love about Athena that you found in yourself before, they're still in you, I promise. They just seem lost to you right now, okay? I nod. I know Mom wants to say the right thing to me. I can see how hard she's trying, going slowly, measuring her words, her eyes brimming. I want to tell her she doesn't have to say anything, that her hearing all this is what matters. But then she says, "You deserve to love yourself." And it hits me suddenly how true that is.
Well, as Anne said, we were both in these transitional times, really crossing feminine thresholds. At 50, I could feel my young womanhood sort of packing up to leave. I mean, I could feel it going on in the next room, you know. I could feel it not only in the physical changes that I saw in the mirror and the changes in my body that were pretty dramatic. I describe it in the book like I would look at the sags and lines coming into my face like a seismologist studying tectonic plates. But it wasn't just that. It was also this new awareness of my own mortality that was present. It was the way I needed to pack up and move to a new geography that was probably about needing to move to some new landscape in my own self. It was about the way I couldn't write the same way anymore, like my writing had gone to seed. It was about some little fear in me that I couldn't generate the potency that I needed for that third act in my life, and fulfilling that desire to become a novelist that I write about in the book. It was just apparent to me in a lot of ways. I do think there is an odyssey that the female soul really wants to make at some point in a woman's life that has to do with crossing over into this older woman she will become. I mean, I know what they say, that 50 is the new 40, and I'm all for that. I want to go on record. But I also think that beneath the rhetoric of that, I sense something wanting to end and something new wanting to start, and that what wanted to start was some new renaissance for a woman after 50. And I wanted to explore what that was. But for me, it really started with the acknowledgement of the loss of it. The passage I want to read, the final passage we'll read, is, I think you'll see me in that process of dealing initially with some of the loss. "Don't let me wear pink to your wedding," I say. Anne and I sit at a table below the Louvre Museum's glass pyramid and talk not about all the sublime art we've just seen, but about wedding outfits. Not powder blue either, and no jacket with shoulder pads. "I promise," says Anne. Her wedding date is set, June 3rd, 7 months away. But we've already spent a lot of Sunday afternoons making wedding plans. As I tell my friends, I have rented the tree. I love that she picked out a 500-year-old moss-laden oak to be her church. We have a guest list of 120, which is about all the people we can sit beside it. She will walk down a path to the tree that cuts through a rose garden. Floral arrangements would be redundant. I am sincerely happy about the wedding, and I adore Scott, but several times since Anne called me with the news, I felt a small wrench at the back of my heart when I think about it. I know it isn't about her. It's about me. But I don't know precisely what the feeling is. A longing? A sadness? The baton passing again? I'm eating some sort of sandwich that I fear could be spread with goose liver. I push it aside and drink my demi-pression. My mind goes to the classic moment in the tale of Snow White when the mother is eclipsed by the daughter. The queen consults her magic mirror. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? She expects to hear her own name called as usual, but her stepdaughter has recently become a young woman, and the queen is getting crow's feet. Snow White, the mirror says, and zap, the queen is dealt her first shock of age. Perhaps all mothers of daughters possess a secret talking mirror that announces when their young womanhood begins to fade and their daughters begins to blossom. As in the fairy tale, the experience can unleash a lacerating jealousy in some mothers, which turns up like poison apples on the daughter's doorstep. It can usher in fears that I would have sworn I'd never have, of invisibility, anonymity, irrelevance, and deeper down, fears of decline and death. That night, in the hotel bathroom, I stand at the sink exhausted, tired from the flight and the walking. I just want to go to bed. I squirt toothpaste onto my toothbrush, and when Anne appears in the doorway with her cosmetic bag, I step over to make room for her at the sink. As we stand side by side and brush our teeth before the mirror, I gradually become aware that I am watching her face. Mirror, mirror. She is so beautiful. Thank you. I believe we're to take questions. Is that correct? Okay. No time for questions? We can take two? Okay, 2 questions. We'd love to hear from you.
Your choice of a church for the wedding, were there other religious dimensions that your spiritual journey changed or went on?
Were there spiritual dimensions to the wedding? Is that what you asked?
Experience or choices that were a result of what was happening with you both. Yeah.
Okay, the question has to do with the spiritual dimension of the travels we made. I think it was certainly there. I think Anne was dealing with very large questions about her life. Who am I? What am I to do with my life? How do I deal with relationships and so forth? I was dealing with who am I? What do I do with the rest of my life? And I think that spiritually, we were finding new spiritual centers, new icons. Anne had her triptych of the Virgin Mary, Joan of Arc, and Athena, which is quite a trio. So I think all of these icons, and for me, the Black Madonna, were infusing our experience. Another question? Is there? Yes. One more question. Yes. The question is, why did we choose to go to France, Greece, and Turkey? Well, we we are very connected to Greece. We had each made a trip there earlier, and we loved it. And I think there's a real particular reason why we went back to Greece, which is rather long and complicated to explain in a short amount of time, but it had to do with Anne and her first trip to Greece. So let me just thank all of you for being here and letting us talk to you about traveling with Pomegranates. Thanks.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.